I look weird, but otherwise I'm real normal. Everything will be cool.
Behind a face shaped by a rare bone disorder was the radiant soul of a teenage boy named Rocky Dennis. Brilliant, kind, and full of life.
Wow! I'm cured. I'm healed. I can go home now. It's the water in the Zuza, Bill.
In a world that stared, judged, and recoiled, Rocky chose to smile, to dream, and to defy the cruel odds written in his medical charts. His story, immortalized in the movie Mask, is not just one of pain, it's of courage, love, and a mother's relentless devotion. This is the unforgettable journey of a boy who refused to be defined by disease and the legacy he left behind. A troubled beginning. Rocky Dennis was born on December 4, 1961 in Glendora, California, to Florence Rusty Tullis and Roy Dennis. From the start, something seemed off. As an infant, Rocky was often sick. He suffered from chronic ear infections and constant sinus problems. At first, these symptoms didn't seem out of the ordinary. Many children get sick frequently. But in Rocky's case, the illnesses persisted and worsened. Doctors were puzzled, but couldn't find a definitive answer. It wasn't until he was around 2 years old that something more alarming was uncovered. During what was supposed to be a routine tonsillectomy, doctors noticed abnormal formations on his X-rays. These were not minor irregularities. They suggested something serious and rare. Further testing was ordered, and over the next year, Rocky and his mother, Rusty, spent an exhausting amount of time at UCLA Medical Center. They were there nearly every week, undergoing exams, scans, and consultations with specialists from multiple departments. Eventually, the medical team reached a devastating conclusion. Rocky had a condition called craniodiaphyseal dysplasia, one of the rarest bone disorders ever recorded. Fewer than 20 documented cases existed in medical history. The disease causes abnormal calcium deposits to build up in the skull and facial bones, leading them to thicken over time. As the bones expanded, they began to compress vital areas of the head, including the optic and auditory nerves, the sinuses, and eventually, the brain itself. The outlook was grim. Doctors told Rusty in blunt terms that her son's condition was terminal. They said the disease would render him blind and deaf. They said he would suffer severe cognitive delays. And worst of all, they told her he would not live past the age of 7. Shortly after this diagnosis, Roy Dennis, Rocky's father, left. Whether it was fear, grief, or simply unwillingness to face the reality of his son's condition, he walked away from the family. From that point on, it was just Rusty and Rocky. She was a single mother with a dying child, but she refused to be broken by her fate. Despite the grim prognosis, Rusty refused to accept the doctor's timetable and began preparing Rocky for a life they said he'd never have. A mother's defiance. Rusty Dennis was not a conventional mother by any stretch of the imagination. Her parenting style was fierce, headstrong, and completely unorthodox. She wasn't interested in sheltering her son from pain or difficulty. She didn't try to soften the world for him or create a bubble of comfort. In fact, she believed that hardship could be a kind of fuel, something that, when handled correctly, could build strength and self-mastery. From a young age, Rusty held fast to a core belief. The human mind was powerful enough to influence the body, possibly even to heal it. "I decided early in my life," she once told reporters, "that if you could make yourself sick, then you could make yourself well." This wasn't just a theory to her, it was a personal truth. And it became the foundation of everything she taught her son. As his disorder progressed, Rocky's skull grew much larger than normal, which led to constant, excruciating pressure on his brain. Most people, especially most parents, would have panicked or collapsed under the weight of such a diagnosis. But Rusty did the opposite. She leaned into her instincts and refused to let Rocky see himself as a victim. Her approach wasn't gentle. It was tough, even jarring. But it was rooted in a belief that Rocky was more than his diagnosis. When he came to her complaining about the blinding headaches caused by the intense pressure inside his skull, she didn't cradle him or immediately reach for medicine. She didn't call the doctor or offer soothing words. Instead, she gave him a simple, stark instruction. Go to your room, and don't come out until you've made yourself well. To most people, that might sound like neglect or even cruelty. But for Rusty, it was a challenge, a dare to her son's spirit. And remarkably, Rocky rose to meet it. He didn't just endure the pain, he learned to manage it. Over time, he taught himself how to use biofeedback techniques and controlled breathing to reduce the intensity of his headaches. He trained his mind to take control of his body's signals. This kind of discipline was rare in any person, let alone a child battling such overwhelming physical hardship. But Rocky wasn't like most kids. He didn't get the luxury of living in a world where someone else could fix his problems. Under Rusty's guidance, he came to understand that if he wanted to live well, he had to take control of his pain, of his fear, and even of the way he saw himself. And the challenges didn't stop there. As he got older, Rocky began to lose his eyesight. His vision declined rapidly, and by the time he was 6 years old, he was declared legally blind. One day, a doctor looked Rusty in the eye and told her that her son's eyesight was too far gone. He would never be able to read a book, the doctor said. It was simply impossible. Rusty didn't argue. She didn't waste energy on a debate. Instead, she turned to her son, handed him a book, and said, "Here, read this." What happened next stunned the room. Rocky opened the book, stared at the pages, and began to read out loud. Slowly, carefully, but clearly. Then he looked up at the doctor, his voice calm but unmistakably firm, and said, "I don't believe in being blind." Armed with that same defiance, Rusty turned her attention toward giving Rocky something society often denied to people who looked different: an education. Fighting for normal. Rocky's early education was anything but smooth, and from the very beginning, it was marked by challenges that most children never have to face. While his medical condition didn't affect his intelligence, it often caused people, including educators, to make assumptions about his abilities based solely on how he looked. Rusty knew this, and she tried to stay one step ahead of the judgment.
So I lied about his age and I put him in school. Well, obviously he was at least 6 months younger than the other kids, and he was more mature than they were.
When Rocky was just 4.5 years old, she made the bold decision to lie about his age so she could get him into school early. Her hope was that starting school young would help him adjust socially and academically before anyone had the chance to place limits on him. Years later, during an interview on the TV talk show People Are Talking, Rusty openly admitted to the lie. She said she did it because she believed Rocky deserved a chance, even if it meant bending the rules. At first, things seemed to be going according to plan, but her efforts were short-lived. School officials soon discovered that Rocky was underage, and he was promptly removed from the school. Still, they didn't completely shut the door on his education. Instead, they offered him a place in what they described as a special school, a program designed for children with developmental or intellectual disabilities. Rusty accepted the offer, though she remained skeptical. Rocky spent the next couple of years in this environment, which was geared more toward teaching basic life skills than fostering academic growth. He spent a couple of years learning the things they teach handicapped people, Rusty later recalled. It was clear to her that Rocky wasn't being challenged intellectually. The school had assumed he had cognitive delays, even though Rusty knew better. She saw firsthand that her son was bright, curious, and eager to learn, qualities that weren't being recognized in his current setting. When Rocky turned 7, Rusty decided it was time to push for a change. She began the process of trying to enroll him in a regular public school, but once again she encountered resistance. The school administrators were hesitant to place him in a mainstream classroom. They questioned whether he was intellectually capable of keeping up with other students. But Rusty didn't buy it. She firmly believed that their real concern wasn't Rocky's mind, it was his face. The severe facial deformities caused by his condition made people uncomfortable, and Rusty believed that this discomfort was being disguised as concern over his academic ability. Determined to give her son the opportunities he deserved, Rusty didn't back down. She fought the system at every turn, challenging the educators' assumptions and demanding that Rocky be evaluated based on his actual abilities, not his appearance. She pushed through countless meetings and roadblocks, refusing to let her son be denied access to a standard education. Eventually, her persistence paid off. Rocky was allowed to enroll in a public school classroom. At first, he was behind. He hadn't had access to the same academic instruction as his peers during those crucial early years. But once he was in the right environment, something incredible happened. Rocky began to catch up quickly. he was eager to learn and worked hard to close the gap. With the right support and the chance to show what he could do, he began to excel. By the time he graduated from Sandburg Junior High, Rocky had done far more than just keep up. He had become an honor student. He had gone from being dismissed as intellectually disabled to proving that he was not only capable, but exceptional. His early education had been full of misunderstanding, bias, and rejection. But thanks to his mother's relentless advocacy and his own determination, Rocky had defied the odds. But while he was achieving academic success, his physical challenges were growing harder to ignore and more painful to endure. Living with craniodiaphyseal dysplasia. By his teenage years, Rocky's condition had worsened. His skull continued to thicken, putting constant pressure on his nerves and brain. The pain was relentless. Over time, his vision began to fade, and doctors warned that the pressure inside his skull could lead to blindness, seizures, or even death. Medical specialists eventually offered a possible solution. They proposed a major surgical procedure, a form of reconstructive or plastic surgery that could potentially relieve the pressure on his brain and nerves. The surgery wouldn't cure the disorder, but it might slow its progression and ease some of the symptoms. In theory, it could extend Rocky's life. It was a drastic operation with many risks, but it was the best option the doctors could offer. But Rocky said no. When his mother asked him why he didn't want to go through with the surgery, he gave a simple but powerful answer. "Who will I see in the mirror if I change my face?" That one sentence revealed everything about who Rocky was. He wasn't in denial about his condition. He knew exactly what he looked like. He knew that people stared, that strangers were often shocked or uncomfortable around him. But he also knew who he was, and he had come to accept that fully. Changing his face to ease the world's discomfort, or even to prolong his life, didn't feel right to him. He had lived long enough to understand that identity wasn't just about survival or appearances. It was about self-respect. Rocky had learned how to cope with physical pain, social isolation, and medical uncertainty with a kind of inner strength that most people never have to develop. He didn't try to hide who he was. He didn't pretend to be someone else. He faced each day with a quiet dignity, even as his condition grew more serious. His decision to reject surgery wasn't about giving up. It was about holding on to his sense of self, to his values, and to the face he had grown up seeing in the mirror. Despite the physical decline, Rocky kept living his life as fully as he could. He stayed active in school, remained close to his friends, and continued to challenge the limits others tried to place on him. His refusal to have the surgery became another moment like so many others in his life where he made it clear that he would live on his own terms, not according to what others thought was best for him. Still, even strength has its limits. By the fall of 1978, Rocky's health began to crumble under the weight of his disease. A quiet goodbye. September 1978 marked the beginning of the end for Rocky. After years of fighting an unforgiving disease, his body was starting to give out. The craniodiaphyseal dysplasia that had slowly been thickening his skull was now taking a heavier toll than ever before. The pressure on his brain and nerves was constant. His vision was fading, the pain never really stopped, and now even basic movement was slipping away. Rocky could no longer walk on his own and had to begin using a wheelchair. It was a heartbreaking turn for him, for his mother Rusty, and for everyone who had watched him fight so hard for so long. Still, Rocky didn't give in. He stayed hopeful. He stayed brave. On the evening of October 3rd, the family went out to dinner together. It wasn't just a meal, it was a moment of trying to hold on to something normal, something comforting. But it was clear that Rocky was fading. He looked tired, worn down in a way that felt different. Everyone could feel it, even if they didn't say it out loud. Later that night, he was hit with a severe headache, one worse than usual. It wasn't his first, but something about it unsettled Rusty. Still, she responded the way she always had. She didn't want to scare him. She didn't want him to feel like he was slipping away. So she told him gently, like she had so many times before, "Go to your room and make yourself well." It was her way of keeping him strong, of helping him believe he could fight through it like he always had. But this time would be different. The next morning, October 4th, Rusty heard Rocky moving around at 6 a.m. The sound gave her a small sense of relief. He was still here. Maybe the pain had passed. But according to initial reports, when she went to check on him later, around 10 a.m., Rocky was gone. He had died in his sleep. The official cause of death was sudden arrhythmic death syndrome, a condition that causes the heart to stop unexpectedly. It may have been triggered by the strain his condition had put on his body over the years, but in truth, no one could say for certain. All anyone knew was that Rocky's heart had stopped beating, and his brave fight had come to an end. In an even more painful twist, Rusty later revealed that she hadn't actually been home when he died. That morning, she had been at her lawyer's office dealing with fallout from a recent drug raid at their house. A chaotic part of their lives that had nothing to do with Rocky, but added stress and uncertainty to an already difficult situation. It was her boyfriend at the time who called her with the worst news she could have imagined. Rocky was just 16. Though his life ended too soon, it didn't fade into obscurity. His story would soon be retold on screens, on stage, and in song. Immortalized on screen. Mask, the movie. In 1985, acclaimed filmmaker Peter Bogdanovich brought a deeply moving true story to the screen with the release of Mask, a drama based on the life of Rocky Dennis. The screenplay for Mask was written by Anna Hamilton Phelan and drew heavily from the real-life experiences of Rocky and his mother, Rusty. Actor Eric Stoltz took on the demanding role of Rocky, undergoing hours of makeup each day to authentically portray the teenager's distinctive physical appearance. Stoltz's performance was widely praised for its depth and sensitivity, capturing Rocky's keen intellect, quick wit, and the quiet courage with which he navigated a world that often judged him by his looks before seeing his true self. Rusty was portrayed by Cher. In one of her most acclaimed dramatic performances, she brought Rusty to life as a tough, unconventional, and fiercely devoted single mother. Rusty's character was far from perfect. She had a rebellious streak, a history of drug use, and a deep mistrust of authority. But her love for her son was unconditional and unshakable. The emotional complexity Cher brought to the role earned her the Best Actress award at the Cannes Film Festival. When Mask premiered, it was met with widespread critical acclaim. Audiences and reviewers alike were struck by its honest and unflinching portrayal of disability, motherhood, and resilience. The film didn't rely on sentimentality. Instead, it showed the reality of living with a rare medical condition and the extraordinary lengths to which a mother would go to protect and empower her child. While the movie touched many hearts, Rusty herself later revealed that the film had taken creative liberties. She expressed disappointment that certain important aspects of Rocky's life and her own were either altered or omitted entirely. Some of the more difficult or controversial parts of their story were smoothed over for mainstream audiences. Nevertheless, many felt that Mask succeeded in conveying what Rusty herself called the emotional truth of their journey. At its core, the film remained faithful to the spirit of Rocky's life, his humor, his determination, and his refusal to let his illness define him. The bond between Rocky and Rusty was the emotional heart of the film. Their relationship, full of clashes and deep affection, created an authentic and powerful narrative. The film didn't shy away from showing the messiness of their lives. Rusty's clashes with school officials and doctors, and her efforts to give Rocky as normal a life as possible despite the odds. It also showed how Rocky, in turn, grounded his mother, helping her to find purpose and strength amid chaos. But the silver screen wasn't the only place Rocky's spirit lived on. Songs for Rocky. Swedish pop artist Jens Lekman was so moved by Rocky's story that he wrote and self-published a haunting track titled Rocky Dennis's Farewell Song to the Blind Girl. Then in 2004, Lekman released an entire EP dedicated to Rocky Dennis. He titled it Rocky Dennis in Heaven. The collection of songs served as a personal tribute, a creative and emotional interpretation of a young man whose courage and personality had transcended his physical appearance. Through his music, Lekman paid homage to a boy he never knew, but who clearly left a deep mark on him. The EP offered listeners a chance to connect with Rocky in a new, more intimate way. This time, not through medical charts or dramatic film scripts, but through music that reflected both melancholy and hope. Rocky's story didn't stop there. In 2008, his life was reimagined yet again, this time for the stage. A musical adaptation of Mask, the 1985 film that originally brought Rocky's life to public attention, premiered at the Pasadena Playhouse in California. With music composed by the legendary duo Barry Mann and Cynthia Weil, and a script by Anna Hamilton Phelan, the stage production brought new emotional depth to Rocky's journey. It introduced his story to a younger audience, many of whom had never seen the original film or heard of Rocky Dennis before. Rocky may have only lived 16 years, but his legacy continues to touch lives around the world, not because of how he looked, but because of how he lived. The boy behind the mask. Rocky Dennis didn't ask to be an example. He didn't live his life to prove a point or to earn admiration. But somehow, in the way he carried himself, through pain, through difference, through days that would have broken most, he left behind something that still moves people decades later. His condition changed how people saw him, but it never changed how he saw others. He treated people with gentleness, even when he had every reason to turn bitter. He stayed kind, even when the world gave him plenty of chances not to be. And that choice, to meet life with grace instead of anger, became the quiet power he passed on to everyone around him. Rocky's legacy isn't about beating a disease. It's about showing what strength really looks like. Not loud, not perfect, not easy, but real. He reminded people, and still reminds them, that worth has nothing to do with appearance or limitations, that you don't need to be flawless to be unforgettable. Years after his death, people who never met Rocky still talk about him. Some find courage in his story when they feel ashamed of their scars. Some find hope when they're told what they can't do. And some just remember that if Rocky could live with such honesty and heart, so can they. What do you think about Rocky's story? Tell us in the comments below. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.